It's Painting with Inks Day. Did you know you could do that? It just recently occurred to me, and by recently, I mean like 2 years ago, because I've done something similar before. Hi, I'm Irene, and this is Inkworks. So I pulled out several of my fountain pen ink bottles, poured a little of each onto a porcelain palette, and chose 2 applicators for this project. A Winsor & Newton goat hair brush and a kakimori brass nib. The goat hair brush is the same one used in the previous video. It has a bamboo handle, and the hairs come to a nice point. The kakimori brass nib is pretty cool. You simply insert it into a standard holder. There's no reservoir, but the nib's thin open channels means it holds a nice amount of ink, more than some other types of dip pens. For the paper, I chose Arches Hot Pressed. I figured the smooth surface would be a good match for the inks. I brushed some water across the surface, then started painting. First with Birmingham's Tea Berry Ice Cream. Next, it was Hongdian's Burley Wood, then Pilot's Iroshizuku Chikurine, and Lami's Turquoise. The 5th color on the palette is Birmingham's Sterling Silver. It's kind of a muted purple and was mostly used for line work near the end of each piece. Oh yeah, there are 2 paintings. This first one was full saturation, while the second one was watered down to soften the colors. I did something I haven't done since the early days of this channel, but more on that later. Because Inkworks just had its 4th birthday. That's right, this channel is no longer a toddler, and that means it's living in its own apartment in the city where it can do whatever it wants with very little supervision from me. Figuratively speaking, of course. Look, I don't have children, so there's no need to worry about my non-existent parenting skills. Babysitting nephews and nieces was enough to convince me that motherhood was not a road I wanted to travel. Growing up in a large family also might have had something to do with it. I selected some of my brightest colors because I wanted to evoke a cheery, spring-like feel. Normally, I'm really into winter, but after a month-long illness, warmth and sunshine sounds like just the thing. This was all quite experimental, since I wasn't sure how well these inks would behave on this paper. None of the inks here are waterproof, and all have differing degrees of stainability. So there were those variables as well. But more importantly, most fountain pen inks are dye-based, and thus fugitive, meaning they are not light-fast. So I would not sell anything I painted with this medium. However, there's no reason why you can't paint ephemeral pieces, save them as digital files, and create prints to sell from those. You'll notice a hairdryer come into play because I didn't want the colors to blend too much from layer to layer. Water drops were flicked to create desaturated spots of splatter, and a dabbing tissue was used to blot excess. Later on, I also grabbed my Umbria Bright brush to place wet strokes so I could precision lift some of the color. Other than that, I didn't consciously water anything down on this first piece. I say consciously because I'm sure incidental water came into play simply through the brush rinsing process between colors. By the way, the reason I left in some of the hairdryer footage is because I want you to know it was an important part of the process. If you don't want your project to take 4 hours, I'm not necessarily endorsing cutting corners, but I also know better than to add wet green on top of wet orange. Quiet in the peanut gallery. On the subject of cutting corners, you know those Marie Callender frozen pot pies? Well, you gotta bake 'em long enough to heat the innards, but not too long or you'll overbake the crust. After multiple instances of choking down mouthfuls of mushy ash, I've learned my lesson. So these days, I take the time to cut strips of aluminum foil for wrapping the crust's edge, just like how the instructions suggest. Look, you do you. All I'm saying is, if you want an edible crust, use foil. And if you want a decent ink painting, use a hairdryer between layers. Spring is just around the corner, and I'm kind of stoked about it. Which is strange, because if any phrase should induce chills, it's just around the corner. It's a horror story trope, after all, closely related to what's behind that door. What's around the corner? I don't know. Why don't you go find out while I stay here far away from dark and creepy corners? It doesn't help that St. Patrick's Day is included in the just around the corner business. At the time of this voiceover recording, it's less than 10 days away. Not that I'm anti-Irish or anything. It just feels weird to participate when I'm pretty sure there's 0 Irish in my heritage. Which sucks, because I love shades of green and enjoy a good corned beef and cabbage supper. Enjoy, but not love. So I'm always pushing for a beef and Guinness pie. One time, we actually made steak and Guinness pie using Jamie Oliver's recipe, and it turned out rather well. Personally, I thought it was too Guinnessy, but that might be because I prefer lager over stout. My brother and his wife, however, gave the dish 2 thumbs up. With corned beef, I'm sort of ambivalent. It doesn't particularly excite me, but if you plop a Reuben sandwich or corned beef hash in front of me, I'll be all, that's what I'm talking about. Nom, nom, nom. As far as cabbage goes, I'll take a nicely dressed coleslaw or an Asian stir-fry over boiled a la UK. Here, I splattered a mixture of white gouache, a little bit of water, and a smidge of Birmingham's tea berry ice cream. Surprise! Bet you didn't see that coming. It's a nice touch if I do say so myself. Why do people say that? I mean, I'm all for tooting one's horn, but if I do say so myself, doesn't soften one's boast, does it? Maybe I'm not hearing that idiom properly. Explain it to me. Remember way back to the beginning of this video when I said I did something I haven't done since the early days of this channel? Well, that something was forget to turn on the camera. That's why this second piece starts in progress. On the bright side, you didn't miss much, since it was all basically the same techniques. I just added some water to lighten the colors. Am I still making sense? For those who are new to this channel, I used to include music to fill some of the runtime, in between important art process stuff and the occasional entertaining anecdote. In other words, I didn't talk much until enough comments were posted saying, "More stories." Well, as they say, be careful what you wish for, because the beast was woken, and for the past couple of years, I've talked so much that sometimes I lose track of what's what. Case in point, a moment ago, when I said, "Still making sense?" a flashback played in my head. One where my mother and I watched the music documentary Stop Making Sense on VHS. How I got my mother to watch a Talking Heads concert is hazy. I mean, that just wasn't her thing. Her thing was PBS cooking and nature programs. That's not why it's such a strong memory, though. The reason that experience stuck with me is that was the hardest I ever heard my mom laugh. In the middle of the movie, David Byrne wears a ridiculously large suit while performing "Girlfriend is Better." She wasn't simply chortling. No. She was gasping and wheezing, bust-a-gut howling. Oh, no worries. She was fine. But the only other time that came close was when we rented The Gods Must Be Crazy. So I had to break for dinner, and now I want to share my food success with you. Producer Mike was in charge of the cubed pork patties, and they ended up as delicious breaded cutlets, made extra yummy with the addition of Bachan's Japanese BBQ sauce. I was tasked with stir-frying a melange of veggies: onion, cabbage, zucchini, and mushrooms. Sure, I cheated by using a leftover seasoning packet from instant ramen, but it takes skill to time things so that nothing is either undercooked or overcooked. It was impressive, if I do say so myself. Gotta admit, I'm kinda curious if there are any viewers who think this was a waste of good fountain pen ink. You know, since I could have done this or something similar with watercolors, but I don't do enough writing where I'd feel stingy about using inks for art. Is it wrong to paint with fountain pen inks? As long as no one gets hurt, I'm fine with it. But perhaps a better question is, does it look good? Well, from where I'm standing, it looks good. Where do you stand? Do you think fountain pen ink is only for writing? One of the inks used today, Hongdian's Burley Wood, is new to Inkworks. The color is a light to medium brownish orange. I've used it in my Platinum Prefonte with a medium nib, and although it's more pale than I like for writing, Burley Wood displays a fair amount of shading, which I do like. Another plus for me is the excellent design of its 60ml bottle. The rectangular shape is stable, and while the form isn't sexy, it is practical. Kudos for the inner lining of the cap, making for a very secure seal. This was the second project where I used the Winsor & Newton goat hair brush, and I liked it even more this time. Could it be that loose, unstructured florals are less stressful than recreating album covers? Yes, I think so. I'm happy to share this fountain pen ink painting. I don't think it's wrong, but then I also didn't think it was wrong to turn my best pair of jeans into cutoffs one sweltering summer. That is, until autumn came around again. Then I thought it was so wrong. Until next time, remember, there are no rules in painting, or if there are, ignore them. It's what I do, and look where I am today. Wearing velour lounge pants and wondering if I'm making sense. That's where. And stay artsy, my friends.